This is Lenny and Belisi again. We're talking about Unit 9 about how to deal with alpha contract verbs, and we want to make a few comments on the different forms. We gave you the general principles of what they are, and the overarching rule, which is the rule about transformation of the thematic vowel from EO alternation to alpha omega alternation. I want to make some comments about individual forms and then talk to you about the principal parts of contract verbs. So I think the imperfect is the verb tense where you see most clearly the EO alternation of the thematic vowel of regular verbs. It's the same goes for the contract verbs, and it's the same in the active as against the middle passive. If you look at page 233 in the top, you'll see the alternation between omega and alpha. And long alpha is transparent. The only trick to it, there isn't any trick to it. In the present is the little trick about the iota subscript in the forms that have an EI, and the iota gets translated into an iota subscript in the second person singular, third person singular. In the middle forms of the present, you'll notice that there too you have a very simple principle of alternation between omega and long alpha, except in the second person singular. In the second person singular of contract verbs, the underlying form is, and the book doesn't tell you this, but let's spell it out, please. The underlying form is that you have your stem, tim. You have the alpha, that's at the end of the stem. You have, in the second person singular, the thematic vowel is an epsilon, okay? And then the old ending of the middle is SAI, okay? Sigma, alpha, iota, okay? So what happens here is something complicated. That is, the S there between the epsilon and the I disappears. It turns into a Z and an R, and then it goes away altogether. It turns into an H, and then it goes away altogether. So the E and the AI contract, as well as the alpha and the result of the E and the AI contraction. And all of that ends up being tima with an alpha and an iota subscript. So that's a second person singular, the circumflex over it, second person singular middle passive present, but it's also, here, check this out, it's also the same as the third person singular active form. Moreover, in the subjunctive, okay, of this, the present subjunctive of this verb, because you have the same thing happens, there isn't anything different that happens. Now, remember, the subjunctive is based on an alternation between omega and eta, okay, or eta and omega. What happens to that is it becomes an alpha and omega alternation, just like for the indicative forms. In other words, there's no difference between the present subjunctive of timao type verbs and the present indicative. The forms are identical. Okay, so timo, timas, tima, and that form is both indicative and subjunctive. So we can say that that form up there, tima, is both the second person singular present indicative middle. It's the third person singular present indicative active, and it's the second person singular of the present indicative of the present subjunctive middle, and the third person singular of the present subjunctive active. Okay, so one form can be four different things. Okay, you need to be aware of all the options that are being diluted by the contraction process. So that's one comment on the way the formations work. Here's one more. When it comes to the optative, you may remember that in the optative, let's make it as a principle, the thematic vowel is always omicron, and it's just like participles, okay? So that means that every optative is where you have had an alpha and a stem, you're going to have an omega. So if you look at the formation of the optative on page 234 in the book, you've got timo, mi, timos, and timo. What happens is the iota becomes an iota subscript, timo with an omega and an iota subscript, and you have a circumflex over the omega because you contracted a with oi. Okay, so you get the long alpha as a result, and the iota becomes an iota subscript, just like alpha plus EI gives you a long alpha plus an iota subscript. So all of these optative forms are going to have an omega and iota subscript, but here's a weird thing that's an archaism about the contract verbs. In the plural, the optative formant is not just iota, but iota eta. So although you have timome, which is the same as luoime or paideoime in the singular, in the plural, you've got timoe, timoe, timoe ace, timoe a, okay, with an iota subscript, okay, so forth. So you need an accent on the omega. You got acute accents on the omega because you got a long final there, right? And you've got your iota plus the eta format. Okay, this is an older thing, and sometimes you even get this happening in the singular. There are places in which, in more archaic Greek, where you have an iota eta. Well, what you've written up is the singular. In the plural, it's going to be nuts. What Belisi's got there is the older form of the optative singular, but what you always have in the plural is the iota eta format. So the regular plural of the present optative timao is timoi, amen, timoi eta, and so forth. Okay. Good. Yeah, they actually give you both forms, the singular and the plural. The plural iota eta is more common, and the one without the eta is also, you also see it in the plural, in the singular. So you get a mixture of, you have to be ready for a mixture of these things. Two other things. The infinitive, you would expect from these rules that the infinitive consisting of tima plus ain would be timan. I'll write that down. Tau. Yeah, go ahead. This is infinitive. Plus epsilon iota would give you timan, but it's going to be an alpha, not an omega there, right? It's going to be tima plus ain.
Oh,
you want to fix that? Okay, great. So we would expect that to give timan with an iota subscript, but there is no iota subscript. Okay, it's because that epsilon iota, it has a different origin than the one in the second and third person singular of the indicative. Okay, that epsilon iota is later than the one in the indicative, so it comes out different. All right, the participle. Because the thematic vowel for the participle is omicron always, the participle, for example, middle participles are in the present are timomenos and the active timon, timosa, timon. Okay, you're going to have the omega vowel. I don't think they're very difficult. So remember that rule. I think that's your friend, and generally speaking, those are just some special notes. All right, but the last thing we want to look at is the principal parts of any alpha contract verb. They're always the same, okay? So basically you want to just write out the first principal part is written out as timao, but it's actually timo, okay? But we write it out as timao so that you know that it's an alpha contract verb, because there are contract verbs from other things. Then it's timeso with an eta, and that's the future. The aorist is time, sa, okay? The perfect is te, time, ka. The perfect middle is te, time, mai. And the aorist passive is time, thane. Okay? So look at how regular this is. In every case, the form outside of the present system, the timao system, where the stem ends with an alpha, the stem ends with an eta. Okay, so you can draw that if you want to parse out the time on each of the principal parts. You'll see that in the future you've got time, and the aorist you've got time, and so forth in the perfect active, the perfect middle, and the aorist passive. So the stem becomes frozen, and then you just add the endings. Okay. It's extremely regular, more regular than any other verbs. Okay, so and it's easy to do. So compensate for the complicated complicating factors of the contraction in the present system, you've got a hyperregular system outside of that. One last thing, there's another alpha contract verb introduced in this lesson. It's the verb nikao from the noun Nike. We get Nike sneakers, okay? Nike, that means victory in Greek. Okay? And it behaves exactly the same way, and the principal parts are the same. So it's Nikao, which is actually Nico, but then it's Nikeso, Nikesa, and Nikemai, Nanikekan, Nanikemai, and Nikethain. Okay, they're all straightforward. All right.